Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Bothell Shorelines Board meeting for Monday, April 8th in City Hall. All board members are present tonight except for board member Orr. We do expect him, but he has not arrived yet. The first thing on the agenda is public comments, and this is an opportunity for members of the public to address the board on a topic that's not on the agenda for this evening's discussion. So there will be an opportunity later to testify in the open public hearing. If you have a topic that you'd like to address the board that's not on the agenda, if you would like to come forward, just raise your hand. Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes. Do we want to wait for board member Orr to arrive, or should we go ahead and take action? I didn't have any changes.
I have no changes. I move to approve the minutes.
Is there a second?
A second.
There's been a motion by board member Cox, second by board member Page to approve the meeting minutes for March 11th. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Passes unanimously with board member Orr absent. The next item is new business. David, do we have any new business?
I do not.
Okay, the next item is the continued open hearing. So I'd like to reopen the public hearing for the 2019 Shoreline Master Program updates. And we'll let the staff start us out with any changes, or just lead us off, Dave.
Okay. I did put together a short presentation tonight just to kind of set the context for tonight's discussion. So this is a continued public hearing from the March 11th public hearing. And just to review, these are the items that City Council initiated and charged the board with working on this year that are focused on fairly limited amendments based on ecology input, any changes needed due to changed circumstances, and then staff also suggested some non-substantive changes to reduce redundancy and make it clearer and easier to use. So that's what our charge has been. And just to provide the grand scope of things, this is all done under the state's Shoreline Management Act that then gets informed by guidelines issued by the Department of Ecology and that go into our Shoreline Master Program, which goes through a major update approximately every 8 years. This is a more modest update, sort of a midterm update that we're working on now. So this map shows the City of Bothell shoreline jurisdiction, and this actually illustrates one of the changes. It's barely perceptible, but there were few mapping changes that are included here in the shoreline jurisdiction. It includes the Sammamish River for 3.3 miles, the North Creek for almost 7 miles, and 3 1/3 miles of Swamp Creek, which is in our planning area, not within the city limits. So it's just a segment of Swamp Creek to the west of the current city limits. So the shoreline jurisdiction constitutes 6% of our planning area of 18 plus square miles. So the process we've been through to get to this point, we've had Shorelines board meetings in November, December, January, February, March, and now April. We also held a public open house prior to the March 11th public hearing. And we're scheduled at this point to, and this is somewhat still subject to change, but we're scheduled now for a City Council study session on May 14th and public hearing on June 4th. So What is in your packet tonight are the comprehensive plan amendments in attachment 1, which include that updated map that we saw a couple slides ago, and the removal of a flow chart that was redundant with because it was also included in the regulations. Fairly minor changes to the shoreline master program element of the comprehensive plan. The bulk of the work has been on the shoreline management code amendments, which are in your attachment 2, that update definitions, reference, and the habitat scoring system per ecology guidance, update procedures for compensatory mitigation, which was not a required task by ecology, but one that they suggested, and we bit off, and that's been the, I guess, in some ways the majority of the work that we've been doing, and the last item that I think that we need to work through tonight, and then the minor amendments for clarity and ease of use that I mentioned previously. Just a couple of notes. The packet that you got, the version that you got, did not include some the final updates to the note boxes, so I just wanted to point out those. Nothing in the code, so it's not substantive, and we'll have this in the packet that goes to council with your recommendations. But the first change was in the description of the shoreline, the Sammamish River reaches. It should have read that the first reach is from the mouth of the river in Kenmore to the 96th Avenue Northeast Bridge.
Do you have a page reference for us, Dave?
Oh,
Oh, page 10.
Page 10.
yes. So the second paragraph from the bottom in the note box. So instead of 96th Street Bridge, it should be the 96th Avenue Northeast Bridge, just to be precise. The second reaches from that bridge to the North Creek confluence. And the third reach is from the North Creek confluence to the Northeast 145th Street Bridge in Woodinville. It was erroneously titled the Northeast 145th Street Bridge in Redmond. So there is no 145th Street in Redmond. So we'll get that right in the packet that goes to council. Second, I meant to add a credit to Board Member Gustafson and explain that the changes in the mitigation section that we're going to be focusing on tonight were informed by the updates or the suggestions that she sent following the March 11th meeting, which are included in attachment 4. But I did mean to include that in the note box. And then finally, the graphic on page 12, we did a revised version that had the most preferred on top and descending in order that didn't get incorporated into the final version, but we will incorporate in the version that goes to council. And then mapping changes, those are shown in attachment 3 to reflect new conditions, including environment designations, and then also some more minor mapping changes to reflect new data, including new wetland delineations. And 2 changes from the packet, the March 11th packet, in area number 5 on the more minor changes. We had left out a previously delineated wetland area to the southeast that wasn't included in the updated delineation of the parcel to the west of it, but until there is a new delineation done of that parcel, it is appropriate to include the old delineation, and which would be the full extent to the degree that we know today of that wetland and its which is an associated wetland, so it does include the extension of the shoreline natural jurisdiction. And then there was some discussion on March 11th about the wetland area to the north of Home Depot, and we made a correction based on the input that we got at that meeting to include the channel that extends to the north of the footpath there, and leaves out that the pathway, a narrow strip there. So those are reflected in the updated attachment 3. So tonight we did put together a decision agenda, so to speak, for you to work through this. And this is just a suggestion, but you can tackle this differently if you wish. But we suggested that you review the revised draft, starting with subsection 4, which is the section that we remains unresolved from the discussion last time on March 11th, and as you go through that, identify and vote on any proposed revisions that you may have one at a time, so that we can kind of focus on one thing at a time as we work through this. And then we did want you to confirm the direction that we heard on March 11th to only allow off-site mitigation through a conditional use process, as stated in section 13.13.020.5.b, which is part of that section above. And once any revisions are determined, to make a motion and vote on the recommendations as a whole, as amended, as you may amend them tonight. And so following tonight's meeting, once we get through that part, we would like you to authorize the chair or 1 to 3 members of the board to represent the board at the council study session and hearing. We recommend that it be a representative or a small group of representatives so that we don't have to notice that as a board meeting with a quorum. Then one last piece of business will remain approval of tonight's minutes. So I will do those by email. I'll send you a draft after the secretary has had a chance to review it, and then ask you to respond with any changes to me only, and then I'll compile those changes and send it back out for approval. And then enjoy your second Monday evenings. Your terms do continue to March 31st, 2023, but any further activity will depend on council initiation of further work in future dockets. So we have essentially put the one item, potential reconsideration of the buffer reduction on the 2020 docket, but that doesn't really become official until they actually review the 2020 docket and decide whether to charge the board and reconvene the board to consider that. So that completes my presentation. I have the code amendments available to put up on the screen as we work through that, and I can do that as soon as you're ready to proceed.
Okay, so I think process-wise, the first thing we'll do is we'll have public comment, and then I would propose we just keep the public hearing open until we're ready to take action. Then we would close the public hearing and maybe offer the public, if they're interested, a second opportunity to speak. We don't have a huge public here tonight, so plenty of time for that. So do we have anybody signed up on the public comments?
Yes.
No one checked the box. Just one person signed the sheet.
Okay. Is there anybody here who would like to address the board on the updates to the Shoreline Master Program? Okay, seeing none. So David, we're not working from the final draft, so when we make the motion, would it include a statement to include the changes as was in the staff presentation this evening?
Well, the staff presentation this evening, the only changes would be the note boxes. So
Well, there were some map changes, or were those are in our packet, the map changes?
Yes.
Okay, they were just new from the last meeting.
Yes.
Okay.
However, like the graphic. It would
and
be
the
something,
graphic.
yeah.
The graphic is the one thing that is within the code that would be changed.
Okay, so that would be as amended for the flipping of the figure. Okay. So David has recommended we go to section 4, but that would presume that we don't, I mean, we did go page by page last time. Is there any things that we need to readdress, or let's take Dave's suggestion and take up section 4 first, and then if there are other things that we need to come back to, we can.
Yeah, I just had a question, if I might ask from the presentation.
Go ahead. Yeah, this would be perfect time to ask questions, yes.
When you corrected the reaches on the Sammamish, and you indicated they came from the RIRA 8 plan, and I looked for any specific reference to it, but it's pretty obvious that when they did the projects, that is, they used a mile reach for it. Is that correct?
In one of the appendices to the 2005 plan, where they talk about the North Lake Washington actions, you can find in there their identification of the reaches, and they name them mouth to bridge. I'm not sure if each of those happen to be a mile or not, but the mouth to the bridge, and then the bridge to the confluence, and then the confluence to the next bridge in Woodinville is the reaches that they used. It was 1, 2, and 3.
I looked in the 27 update in all of the appendices, and I could not find it, but I
it's
assume
buried in
that
the
it probably was
2005.
in the 2005. So
Right.
that's, thank you. That's
Yeah.
what, but again, I was a little puzzled when I saw the Redmond. So,
Yes.
so that
was my fault.
that was my question. Thank you.
And I realize I failed to introduce again our consultant, Amy Sumi, and I also wanted to recognize that Planning Commission Chair David Bleet is here, and we invited the Planning Commission to send a representative to help make sure that you're aware of what each other is doing, since they're working on critical areas amendments that are related to those that you're doing in the Shoreline Code.
Are there other questions for staff? Okay, David, so which page does section 4 discussion start on?
Starts on page, page 1 of attachment 2. With the page that's on your screen here. Oh, I'm sorry, section 4 of that we were.
Would that be 10?
Yeah, it starts under the big text box on page 10. Also, just for clarity, this was all section 4 previously. We've with some of the changes that were discussed, and just to let it flow better, we have reordered and renumbered it, so it's now section 4 and 5 and 4 through 7, rather than 4 A, B, C, and D.
Okay, so we see the staff has taken our previous comments and added them into the document. Who would like to start? Do we have any comments, changes proposed? David?
For discussion on the reach language again, I'm still a little concerned with how our hands might be tied. Looking at the reaches where they happen to fall, reach 1, up to the bridge in Kenmore, has about a half mile of creek within the city of Bothell. And so if you had a project in there, you would be constrained to that half mile in Bothell or Kenmore. You couldn't go up, if you had to be in the same reach, you couldn't go to the next upstream reach.
Maybe we'd have David put that map up
Yeah.
for us. It's on page, or is that from the previous?
This is from the WIRA report.
Oh, it's from the WIRA report.
But I have extra copies I can hand out.
Okay.
I can also go to, at least to the citywide map here. And hopefully I'll be able to do that.
Can you hand that down?
So it's probably less than a half mile within the Bothell city limits. It's,
Yeah.
But the reach would go from the mouth of the Sammamish in Kenmore up to 96th Avenue Bridge, which is right there at the Wayne Golf Course.
So just a procedural thing. So this is from a document we've received previously, so I don't think we need a new exhibit number for this, correct? It's from the WIRA report that's already an exhibit, or?
I don't know if we have submitted that.
Do you recall, Amy, if we included?
So why don't we just play it on the safe side and give staff a copy and call it exhibit number 8, I think?
Yes.
And my concerns line, just implementing it, I think the intent is to keep it local. But I see almost all of the Sammamish River falls in Reach 2 within the jurisdiction of Bothell. And then you've got these little pieces on each end, upstream of North Creek and then downstream of the bridge. And maybe it'd be more appropriate to say, you know, you have to be within a reach that is contained within the city of Bothell. Like any reach 1, 2, or 3 would be okay. But I think it's a weird hand tie to be like, well, you're upstream of North Creek. You can't do a project downstream of North Creek. But you could go outside of the city, but you couldn't go into the city.
I have a question.
Could you put your microphone down, Ann?
The way the language is now, it's the same reach as the impacted wetland. And is that basically your concern?
Yeah, because it literally would mean it has to, if you were in Reach 1, you couldn't go 1,000 feet upstream if you were on the other side of the bridge, you know, or downstream.
But you're not concerned with the reach language itself, just that the impacted wetland is within that reach and it's short on each end. Is that correct?
I think so. I'm not sure. I understand your question.
Well, my question is, when we get to looking at the actual language on
Yeah.
the reach, what it says is it's the same reach as the impacted wetland. So if I understand what your concern is, that first reach is very short. So you would be very short if you had an impacted wetland there. And it's very short on the third part,
Yes.
the end, but it's big in the middle. So that if you said simply that if you remove the language when we get there to that impacted wetland, but it's within the reach is in Bothell in the Sammamish River, then that's okay.
Yeah, I think my preference would be a reach that affects Bothell, so you could technically go outside of Bothell, but that would be closer to the mark for me. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So is that gonna?
So when we get there, could we
Okay.
just
All right, yeah.
signal it? Yeah.
All right, we'll wait till that comes up.
Since since we're starting to talk about that one, we could kind of resolve that issue and then move on to others. So.
Okay, let's go for it.
Just kind of one thought too is if you can't be in the same reach, like that would be the preference I think that folks have expressed, then the next thing on the list is somewhere else in the city. So presumably first you would look at another reach in the Sammamish River, and then if that still doesn't work, then maybe you look at North Creek or Swamp Creek or something. But
Could you just point out so everyone knows what page and what
Oh, so I'm
citation we're
looking just at
looking
the
at?
hierarchy that's on page 12, either the text or the graphic itself. And so we're talking about the same sub-drainage basin or Sammamish River reach, that sort of level in the hierarchy. And if you can't do the same reach, and I know what David's saying is if you have a very short reach, then you're just going to have very few opportunities probably within that reach, and you're going to be pushed quickly to one of these later steps in the preference order, even though, again, 500 feet away maybe, but just upstream in reach 2, there might be a really great opportunity. So, so to some degree, I think the issue is addressed by you just kind of continue moving down the hierarchy, and you'd start looking at some other place in the city.
Maybe it's the explanatory text on page 10 that stopped me up, like the last sentence of the first paragraph ends, prevents applicants from using any mitigation tools that result in mitigation outside of their impacted drainage, subbasin, or reach.
Which text is that?
Oh, it's in the
code or just the
in the
note?
box, first paragraph in the box, last sentence.
So what would you propose, just changing the note box then?
Yeah, maybe that's just what, I mean, that's what, and I don't even, it might just be for clarification, but when I got to that, and that seemed like it was explaining to me the effect of the following code would be to prevent any, but if there were other measures, it'd be less concerning.
And I think that that last sentence shouldn't say prevent. It said, it should probably be rewritten to say it encourages or, so, because
Limits.
as Amy said, if you go on to options 3 or 4 on page 12, those would be potentially outside of the reach.
And
So the first
Yeah.
option is on adjacent property within the subbasin reach. So if you were right on that, on the back 9 side of the bridge, you couldn't necessarily, you'd have to go to option 2 to do it in a different, or maybe, no, you'd have to go to option 3 to do mitigation on the front 9, since that's a different reach. But you could still get there.
And I guess how burdensome would you envision that being? That's the property I'm really thinking about, this being where it really is one big place where there's an opportunity to do a lot of good work. And we're splitting the reach right in the middle of it. So I didn't want to tie the city's hands on that property.
So I think if an applicant came and could make a good case for that, I think we would say, yes, that makes sense, and it fits within our hierarchy. It's the third step, but it could fit. But you could also change that language if you were so inclined.
I think my personal preference, but just to throw out to the board, would be saying within a reach of, within the city of Bothell would be the first priority, but it wouldn't have to be one. If you're in 1, it has to be 1. If it's 2, it has to be 2. If it's 3, it has to be 3. But I think what Ann was saying, if I understood you, a reach within the city of Bothell.
I think that,
Or
and
is that
if we're
captured?
talking about number 2 being a reach within the city of Bothell,
Yeah.
I think that makes good sense. But I think there's some other issues with this section when we get to talk about it that we need to look at, because it depends on whether you're talking about a mitigation bank or a fee in lieu or just ordinary compensatory mitigation. And certainly for ordinary compensatory, I'm going to call it ordinary.
Yeah.
Not meaning it's not good, but for ordinary compensatory mitigation, I think that's fine. But when we start talking about in the city of Bothell or its municipal growth area or adjacent jurisdictions, then I think we need to be focusing on either fee in lieu or mitigation banks as the appropriate.
Yeah.
Are we kind of on the same line?
Yeah.
Because the city of Bothell cannot permit a ordinary compensatory mitigation outside of their city boundaries. That's another jurisdiction. So the only way that can take place is if it is a mitigation bank or a fee in lieu.
You can get, you'd have to coordinate with the adjacent jurisdiction if they require a clear and grade permit, depending on what level of activity you're doing. We do mitigation projects and within and outside of jurisdictions, not frequently, but often enough. So there's some extra steps involved, but you can do mitigation in an adjacent jurisdiction for impacts within another jurisdiction.
But I think it's a different thing if you're permitting a compensatory mitigation, because they may have different setbacks, different priorities, different buffers, and so forth. So that would be my interpretation, that we should not be permitting quote unquote ordinary compensatory mitigation in another jurisdiction, unless it is tied to a mitigation bank or fee in lieu.
I think just careful with the words. I think it's by permitting, no, the city wouldn't permit it, but you could accept that as mitigation. That's the difference. And you feel like the city should not accept that as mitigation. Am I correct?
I'm not sure, I'm missing a point, so.
Well, I'm just catching me up. The city couldn't permit that other project outside of its jurisdiction. But I think the question is, would the city, do we as the board want the city or not want the city to consider accepting that as mitigation for projects within Bothell? Does that make sense?
That's typically how it works if you do mitigation in an adjacent jurisdiction, is the city would approve it through its SEPA process, but it wouldn't be issuing the permit
Right.
for implementing the mitigation. But the city would be reviewing and approving the
Yes.
mitigation plan through its own
Process.
SEPA and process and that sort of thing. But then it would actually be taking place in an adjacent jurisdiction. You may or may not have to get permits depending on what the actual mitigation activity is.
That I would not like to see. But I think certainly looking at compensatory, other types, as I said, either a mitigation bank or a fee in lieu, yes.
And
So we would need to just put a couple of words on this chart to make that clear.
And you'd only ever get to an adjacent jurisdiction after you've exhausted all of the earlier steps as well, regardless of if it's ordinary or in lieu fee or a mitigation bank.
The way, if you want to talk about this now, specifically this chart and those 4 items, or do you want to wait?
Let's wait.
I want to make sure everybody's up on the same line before we start talking about it. Sarah's got something, I think.
Hi, my main concern before jumping in is that we can all keep a beginner's mind with this, because if we could take a look at this from the perspective of someone who's just jumping into the section 4, if we can find ways to make it as user-friendly as possible. My first question is, I see that we have a definition here, and we've referenced BCC 1303. Does the board think a person reading this for the first or second time would be able to access that definition easily, to navigate the beginning of this section easily?
Where are you referring to, Sarah?
What are you talking about?
My concern is that, for example, subdrainage basin is a very important term here, and the explanatory text is saying that information can be found in BCC 1303. So we know that. My concern is, would someone reading it for the first time know to look there for the relevant definition? That's, I guess, for Dave and Amy.
So I guess that's a basic of code construction, that when you come across a term that that you do reference the definition section, but there isn't, we haven't gone as far as hyperlinking those terms to the definitions.
Whatever you believe is easiest for the readers based on your experience. Or most appropriate based on custom.
I think custom would leave it in the definition section. There's an awful lot of terms of art kind of that are very specific that if we tried to put all of them in the body of the code, then I think that would make it much less user-friendly.
Oh, yes.
And if you're going to be impacting wetlands directly or even figuring out buffers, you're going to have a professional assisting you. There's just no way around that unless you are a wetland biologist. And so all consultants are going to be familiar and know where to go for all these sorts of definitions and how to work with this code.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Just to follow on that, so the reach definition will be included in the code?
It already, oh,
It's in the explanatory box right here, but that wouldn't be in the code.
it's included by reference to the Wire 8, the references to the Wire 8 plan.
But I don't think, well, again, as I said to Amy, I could not find it in the 2017, where they actually outlined how they determined the reaches. So I do think we need to put something in as a specific reference to those reaches.
And we can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We can add a definition.
yeah. It's hidden in the 2005 original.
But it's not easy to find.
No, it's not. It took me a while.
I think that'd be good to add.
I'm just checking here to make sure that there isn't one. There is not. So we could add the corrected language from the note box as a definition of reach as it applies to the city of Bothell.
Yeah. Yeah.
Could you point out, so I can put it in parentheses or something, which is specific thing we're adding as the definition?
It would be a definition. It would be a definition of reach. That would be, I would probably say it would be reach, colon, within, in the city of Bothell includes the Sammamish River from its mouth in Kenmore to the 96th Avenue Northeast Bridge. That's number one. Number two, 96th Avenue Northeast Bridge to the North Creek Confluence, and 3, North Creek Confluence to the Northeast 145th Street Bridge in Woodinville.
Okay. Is everybody okay with that definition? Okay. Is there anything else on page 10 then? Page 11?
I have 2 minor suggestions. On page 11, section 5, where it starts location of mitigation, subsection C, it's about the middle of the page. It says the city will only allow off-site mitigation when an applicant can. And I simply suggest that we move the only over to only when. Just cross out the first only and move it only to over only when. And then I have a second correction on that same page.
Let's see, is there anybody opposed to the proposal?
So it would
me read
read,
it first?
the city will allow off-site mitigation only when an applicant can demonstrate that a higher level of functioning, blah, blah, blah.
I agree, that seems to read better.
Very minor, but I think it just makes it clear.
Any opposed?
And this,
No, nobody's opposed.
you want us to vote on it?
No, no, no.
Okay.
I mean, if there was hands coming up, we would vote, but yeah.
Okay, and then the second one is in subsection, is C, subsection 1, the third sentence down that begins with the word consideration. And it says at the end of that sentence, it says consideration should include blah, 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 blah. And I said consideration shall include. Okay. And then I have one additional consideration to add, and that is the position in the landscape. And the reason that I suggest that we add the position in the landscape as the designing of the compensatory mitigation is when I was reviewing these, I looked at 4 different nearby jurisdictions, City of Kirkland and their compensatory mitigation, Kirkland, Kenmore, King County, and the City of Shoreline. And I will say almost all of them used identical language to ours because everybody in 2005 was using the Model Critical Areas Ordinance, except for Shoreline. And Shoreline did include a design for compensatory mitigation to include looking at the position in the landscape. And I can give you more information on that as to why they did that, if you would like it, but I think it's a very modest change, but important change.
So where are we in?
Yeah, where would you insert that?
You just simply would add it after it says in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, fifth line down, after it says when restored proposed flood storage capacity, add a position in the landscape and potential to mitigate, blah, blah, blah.
I didn't follow that. Can you do that
Did you
one
get
more
it?
time? No, I did not follow. Can
Okay.
you say that again?
So shall I repeat it again,
Yes,
or have you
please.
got it?
Yeah, let me try so you can
Okay,
confirm that I got it right.
okay,
Okay, that last section in 5C1 would read, consideration shall include anticipated wetland mitigation replacement ratios, buffer conditions and proposed widths,
yes,
hydrogeomorphic classes of on-site wetlands when restored, proposed flood storage capacity, position in the landscape,
correct,
and potential to mitigate riparian fish and wildlife habitats.
correct, thank you.
So I'm not even following what that means, Ann. Can you help
Do you,
me?
would you like me?
What does that mean, the position
Okay.
in the landscape? It just.
Okay. This is, it's coming from Shoreline, so
Okay.
do you want me to read it? I've got it written, I could have Dave put it up and you can read it.
Well, I just don't get the concept even. I don't know what.
Okay.
I'm not informed enough to
So-
know what
so
position in
what
the
it
landscape
says is-
means.
Do you want to read it or want me to read it to you?
You can read it, Ann.
Okay. The design for compensatory mitigation project needs to be appropriate for its location, i.e. position in the landscape. Therefore, compensatory mitigation should not result in creation, restoration, or enhancement of an atypical wetland. An atypical wetland refers to a compensation wetland, i.e. created or enhanced, that does not match the type of existing wetland that would be found in the geomorphic setting of the site, for example, of water sources, and hydro period proposed for the mitigation site are not typical for the geomorphic setting. Likewise, it should not provide exaggerated morphology or require berm or other engineered structures to hold back water. For example, excavating or permanently inundated pond in an existing seasonally saturated or inundated wetland is one example of an enhancement project that would result in an atypical wetland. Another example would be excavating depressions in an existing wetland on a slope, which would require the construction of berms to hold water. So I would not put all that in,
Right.
simply by putting the landscape, that's what you're talking about.
So I guess I asked the staff, the consultant would understand that terminology where the layperson wouldn't, the position in the landscape. I doubt we have a definition for that in the, but if the professionals know what that means, that's,
Yeah, I think it's okay to add. I think that just by virtue of being shoreline jurisdiction regulations, we're going to, and mitigation and impacts are already in shoreline jurisdiction, which is a very particular position in the landscape already. You probably get there. It might be more important, I think, outside of shoreline jurisdiction regulation. And to some degree, what Anne was describing is captured by the hydrogeomorphic classes of on-site wetlands when restored. So that's specifically looking at sort of the morphology and hydrology and how you manufacture those. But again, I don't think it hurts to pop it in there.
okay,
And it's meaningful in my world.
okay. Anybody opposed?
Thank you.
Okay.
One suggestion on the beginning of C, on the sentence you revised, the city will allow, by dropping only, what if instead of will, say may? I believe otherwise it reads as if the city is directed, that it gives the applicant more control than the city in the situation, and I'd like the city to retain.
Tell me what,
5C,
yeah?
this, which currently reads, the city will only allow, I prefer to say may, to give the discretion to the city.
Oh, may, okay.
Yeah.
So that would read now, the city may allow off-site mitigation only when an applicant can.
Yes.
Good point.
Anything else on page 11? Sarah?
At the very bottom of the page, item 3, where it starts with off-site locations may include state-certified mitigation banks. My suggestion is that we cut the last part of this item so that it reads, off-site locations may include state-certified mitigation banks, federally certified fee and lieu programs, applicant-owned properties, or public properties subject to agreement with the city. Cut, semicolon, and then just go on to the next item. The reason for that is the language there is almost the same as the language on the next page, D2. And I feel it almost lessens the strength of the language if we repeat it. Sure. So 3C at the bottom of the page. And it's
In the city,
with the city shall, so the last word would be in agreement with the city, and then just add an and. In agreement with the city and, which means that everything below still applies. But we're not going to repeat the language as the impacted wetland when the wetland is located in shoreline jurisdiction.
So, but just to be clear, you're talking about striking everything in C3 after the word city.
Yes. So that's striking 1, 2, 3, 4 lines.
okay, so off-site locations.
Yes.
And where do you go to after your and? That's what I can't figure out.
And after the and, you go straight to item D on the next page.
But shouldn't we end that sentence?
Yeah, I think we would end with a period there.
I mean, you've
Without
got
the
to
and.
end with a period, but you can't do that's the problem.
I feel like you could do a semicolon and an and. Not to get very grammatical here, but
But then if you do a semicolon and, then you're still in section 3.
oh,
I think it would have, if we did this, I think it would have the same effect that you're looking for, just ending it there, because
Sure.
it then comes up in D.
sure. Then take out the and, one less word. The goal here is to reduce redundancy as long as it has the same impact.
And I think that's actually a good one in terms of clarity too, because that last phrase would appear to negate the options under D. So D does lay out the priorities and yeah.
So we're going to end there.
I think that's a good catch.
Thank you.
Is there anybody who was opposed to that strikeout? Okay. Anything else on page 11? Page 12.
This is the difficult one. So first we flipped the figure, okay? So this is, I like the mitigation sequencing, but I'm going to come back to my statement about permitting outside of the city. So it would appear to me that items 1 and 2, as listed here, on an adjacent property. So first, we haven't talked about being on site. So we first need to make sure we've said it's on site. Yes. We've said we didn't say we prefer it on site. We say there is no reasonable on site.
Yeah, that's handled in the first part of location and mitigation, and then this is the hierarchy for specifically
Yes,
for what
okay,
you've.
okay, sorry. Yeah, I
started
was
to look at
looking at,
on-site.
okay, yes, we have. Okay, so they're not 5, but there are 4, okay. But in my way of thinking, an off-site compensatory mitigation can only utilize 1 or 2. It's on an adjacent property within the same subdrainage basin in the Sammamish River as the impacted wetland, except we need to change that now because let me think a minute. Yes. No, we do not, is on the same Sammamish River reach as the impacted wetland. You want to change that, right, David?
Actually, in this order here, I was just thinking I would be fine just saying an adjacent property. You're keeping it local by being adjacent.
Okay, that's, okay, on adjacent property, okay. Or in the same subdrainage basin as the impacted wetland when the wetland is located in shoreline jurisdiction associated with North Creek or Swamp Creek, okay? And then you would like to change it not as the same reach as the impacted wetland, but in the reach of the Sammamish River, however we rewrite that, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I do not see that we should be allowing regular off-site mitigation in the city of Bothell, its municipal growth area, because then we're outside of shoreline jurisdiction, and we are outside of the reaches and the subbasin. So 1 and 2 apply to ordinary compensation, but 1, 2, 3, and 4 all apply to mitigation banks or fee in lieu. Does that make sense? And let's discuss that.
Amy, I see you.
And the reason, let me just say one more thing. The reason that I am saying these, we have talked in the past about wanting the city to have the ability to, if they wanted to either put a mitigation bank wherever they need it. But we focused, as an example, on the Wayne Golf Course. And so this would allow that to happen, but only if you used a mitigation bank or fee in lieu. Okay.
So this sort of comes back around to David's original comment about what if you need to go to a different reach, and it's still within shoreline jurisdiction, but it's a different reach. Or maybe you're on the Sammamish River, down near the confluence with North Creek, and there's not a good opportunity there, but just upstream on North Creek, there's a great opportunity. So I think number 3 has a lot of potential to still be applicable within the city's shoreline jurisdiction and not necessarily put you outside of shoreline jurisdiction just because you're not in the same subdrainage basin or the same Sammamish River reach.
Well,
so that's one thought there. And then on number 4, again, I think there's still potential in adjacent jurisdictions. You could still be within shoreline jurisdiction if you're just downstream of the city of Bothell on the Sammamish River or just upstream of the city on North Creek, you would still be potentially within shoreline jurisdiction. So that does allow potentially, depending on how you interpret it, you to go outside shoreline jurisdiction, but 3 and 4 are not automatically outside of shoreline jurisdiction.
Well, for an adjacent jurisdiction, it would have to be outside of the city of Bothell.
Right, but it could still be in their shoreline jurisdiction. It would still be in shorelines. It would still be on
Well,
River Creek.
That's true, but again, I would say absolutely if you're doing a mitigation bank, but not ordinary compensation. I agree with you on 3 in the city of Bothell, but I would add the words in shoreline jurisdiction, because I don't think that's not clear.
In the city of Bothell's shoreline jurisdiction, or it's Muga's shoreline jurisdiction?
Well, in the city of Bothell, or its municipal growth area in shoreline jurisdiction.
I think since we have included the Muga in our shoreline jurisdiction mapping in our shoreline master plan, then we can just say.
Excuse
in
me,
the city
Dave,
of
would you
Bothell
say that
shoreline
again? I didn't hear what you said.
We've included the municipal urban growth area in our shoreline master program. So I don't think we need to, I think we can just say in the city of Bothell's shoreline jurisdiction, because it includes.
Oh, okay. So you don't need to put municipal growth area?
I don't
Okay.
think so. Is that?
Breyer would be permitting that still, though, right?
No,
mean, it's-
that's in unincorporated Snohomish
Oh,
County.
or the county.
Does that then include Swamp Creek?
That is Swamp Creek, yeah.
That is Swamp Creek then, in the city of Bothell shoreline jurisdiction?
Yes.
So that takes us into Swamp Creek,
Yes.
So,
okay?
yeah, it would still be the county's jurisdiction, though. Shoreline jurisdiction, because you don't get to permit anything in there yet, right?
So, yeah, to be safe, it would write in the city of Bothell's shoreline jurisdiction.
I would think that would imply you're permitting it.
Well, let me finish. Let's say within the shoreline jurisdiction of the city of Bothell or its municipal urban growth area.
Yeah.
One more time, please, David.
So number 3 would read, within the shoreline jurisdiction of the city of the city of Bothell or its municipal urban growth area.
Or what?
Or its municipal urban growth area.
So we're just adding 3 words.
And municipal urban growth areas
I'm
are
sorry,
there.
I don't hear well, and then when you mutter, I don't hear it. Okay,
Sorry, was I muttering?
sorry.
So 3 would read, we would just add to the beginning, within the shoreline jurisdiction of the city of Bothell or its municipal urban growth area.
Okay,
And you could probably do the same thing maybe to 4 and just say in the shoreline jurisdiction of adjacent jurisdictions. And then that would get a little bit of Kenmore potentially, and only as a last resort.
but I have problems going into adjacent jurisdictions, so that one I would say would be all 4 for the mitigation banks and the fee and lieu, but if it's ordinary compensatory mitigation, I would have problems going into Kenmore. I don't know what they're planning, and I don't know how they would plan it.
Well, the applicant would still be in charge of developing and designing the mitigation plan. The city would still be approving it. It would simply be constructed in an adjacent community, and it would be subject to whatever permit.
But
you
that
need to-
adjacent community could be Kirkland, it could be Mill Creek, it could be, this doesn't say within the shoreline jurisdiction.
What if,
And even if it did, it still, the adjacent could be Kirkland shoreline jurisdiction or Mill Creeks or Woodinville's. Yeah, go ahead.
what if instead of saying ecological benefits to the city of Bothell, it was the shoreline jurisdiction, the shoreline jurisdiction of the city of Bothell? I mean, you wouldn't be able to have a project
Kirkland.
in Kirkland showing a benefit to the shoreline jurisdiction of Bothell, whereas something in Kenmore could increase the passage of fish that are using our habitat.
Okay, would you read that again, David?
Similar to what we did under number 3, in adjacent jurisdictions, only when the applicant can demonstrate that the mitigation project will provide ecological benefits to the shoreline jurisdiction of the city of Bothell or its municipal urban growth area.
Okay, to the shoreline jurisdiction of the city of Bothell.
Or its municipal urban growth area.
Okay.
But I
Okay,
think those are good fixes to 3 and 4 to address your concerns, because really, there did leave I think we had an intent, but it did leave an open for just a high and dry wetland that benefited. I don't think you'd accept it, but somebody could try.
Right, yeah, no, I think those are good fixes.
Do we need to do anything to clarify that the shoreline jurisdiction applies to the municipal urban growth area, and we're not saying anywhere in the municipal urban growth area? So clarifying that it's only within the shoreline jurisdiction part of the municipal
Yeah,
urban growth area.
of the municipal growth area.
I think the way it's constructed by starting with the shoreline jurisdiction qualified by the city of Bothell or its MUGA does make that clear that first thing, it has to be within the shoreline jurisdiction, and either within the city or the MUGA.
All right, good fixes. Anything else on page 12?
Okay,
Anything on page?
are we on 13?
Trying to get to 13.
Did we figure out, just for my clarity, what we're doing with the reach language?
We are adding a definition. That would
In terms of how we're tying it to whether or not it has to be within the same reach.
Oh,
Yeah,
Yeah, because I think his point is that You know, the first reach and the third reach are very small within the city of Bothell, so you may as well treat the whole city section of the Sammamish River as a single reach for the purposes of within the same reach.
And we
I think that's the intent of what you're trying to say.
Yeah, I think that's,
Yeah, and either you do that, or then you're just down one more step, and then you're in the shoreline jurisdiction of the city,
Yeah.
that next step. So I think either method works.
So what you're saying is that it really doesn't matter, because if those other areas are too small, then it'll automatically go to the rest of the city anyway.
Yeah, I think the only hiccup is just maybe applicant concern about the level of proof to move from step 2 to step 3. So I think there might be some concern about that, and it probably just depends on how the city implements it and manages it that would take away those concerns.
Can one say as reference, rather than try to redefine what reach means, because the reach in the WIRA is mile reaches. Just say for the purposes here, can you say we're treating the reach from blah to here as one reach? It references this as one reach. For our purposes here.
Then we could maybe just eliminate the reach concept altogether and just say Sammamish River in shoreline jurisdiction, or subdrainage basin for North Creek and Swamp Creek.
I think that would get what the intent was to be, you know, if you have a project in North Creek, it should benefit, the mitigation should be in North Creek. If it's swamp, it should be in swamp, and if it's in Sammamish, it should be the Sammamish.
I think by saying the reach in the city of Bothell, it has to go with that, those preferences. So we still need to talk about the reach in the city of Bothell, because when we talk about as a lower reference, we go to adjacent jurisdiction. So I think we still have to make that determination, yeah, in order to be consistent with our preferences.
Okay, so you're saying that when we go to Woodinville, you can only go as far in Woodinville as that reach. So that 145th Street Bridge would be kind of the far end of where you could go.
Yeah, because then then it becomes an adjacent jurisdiction, so then it's the fourth preference, so. Because otherwise, then everything is up in number 2. So I think you have to make that distinction for the city of Bothell and the reach, but I think it can be done by a fairly simple explanation.
And do we know where the Woodinville city limit is relative to 145th Street?
It's not too far south.
Thanks for these great maps.
Probably under about 3/4 of a stream mile.
Which page are you going off of?
Okay, according to the WIRA mapping, the city of Redmond starts at about 120th Street. So 25 county blocks, which would be just over, it's a mile and a quarter. Yeah, a mile and a quarter.
Okay, so I think we would want to limit it to that first reach, or the 145th Street.
Yeah, I think that's a good fix to address the concerns of going too far away from Bothell.
Yeah. There's not much river in Kenmore, so we're not going too far away from Bothell if we stay on the river in Kenmore.
And you're referring to step 4, the adjacent jurisdiction part, limiting it to those immediately. So reach 1 and reach 3 would be the limits. As far you can go further upstream into reach 4, for example.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. But as far as number 2, you're wanting to open it up and just make it the reaches 1, 2, and 3 as they are within the city is
Correct.
what you think of as the Sammamish River reach for number 2.
Right, for 2, I think, which I think would just be safe to say the Sammamish River
Not have to try and do reaches.
within the city.
And the reaches only matter when you get to 4.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, I don't even know if they matter in 1 when we're saying an adjacent property.
No, it'd just be same drainage, right. Adjacent property.
Um,
Within the same.
Or maybe keep it so that you can't,
Or
an
on
adjacent
the
property
river.
could be upland.
Right.
So maybe keep it there.
Yeah. Okay. So we would be striking or in the same Sammamish River reach as the impacted wetland, or at least part of that. Adjacent.
Maybe it's on the,
Or on the Sammamish River.
yeah. I would propose that.
I lost that one.
So for number 1, it would read on an adjacent property within the
Okay.
same subdrainage basin or on the Sammamish River or along the.
Or
Oh, okay,
adjacent
or on, that's just number 1,
Yeah.
or on the
The
Sammamish River.
strike same.
Reach as the impacted wetland?
I was thinking take the reach part out because
Out.
then
Okay.
I think
Because
adjacent
we
property
assume
keeps
that
it
if it's
close.
adjacent, it's on the Sammamish and it's in the same reach. Okay.
Yeah. Or it could be slightly just on the other side of the line, but it would be,
Yeah, it'd be pretty
as
close.
far as the river's concerned,
Okay.
it's the same.
And then what did we do now with 2?
Maybe instead of saying or in the same reach, just say or again on the Sammamish
Yeah.
River. When the wetland is, when the impacted wetland is located in shoreline jurisdiction associated with the Sammamish River.
Once more, please, slowly. This is number 2.
So it could say, in the same subdrainage basin is the impacted wetland when the wetland is located in shoreline jurisdiction associated with North Creek or Swamp Creek, so no
That's
change.
fine.
Or on the Sammamish River when the wetland is located in shoreline jurisdiction associated with the Sammamish River.
But, no, because that doesn't put us in Bothell. Oh, and include in the city of Bothell.
Yeah,
Okay. Or on the Sammamish River. Okay. In the city of Bothell.
And I think that's a good fix because as written originally here, the reach is, you can go adjacent before you got to that step.
And then 3 is in the city of Bothell,
or in the
shoreline jurisdiction,
of
or-
the city of Bothell.
and we left out the municipal growth area.
No, we
No.
kept that.
Right,
We've got it back in?
yes.
Yeah, we
Okay.
kept the
And then
move
in
out for Swamp
adjacent
Creek purposes.
jurisdictions, blah, 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 to the shoreline jurisdiction in the cities, or the cities. Can we do 4 once more? A second.
What I've got is in adjacent jurisdictions, only when the applicant can demonstrate that the mitigation project will provide ecological benefits to the shoreline jurisdiction of the city of Bothell or its municipal urban growth area.
And we were going to add, and we discussed adding, limiting that to reaches 1, 2, and 3.
And then for North Creek and Swamp Creek, it would remain same subdrainage basin? Or,
And I think that's the intent for the creeks. It would be the same sub-drainage
Yeah.
basin.
As it
And
stands
then for
outside
the
city.
Sammamish River, it has to be, within reaches 1, 2, or 3.
So in mitigation in Reach 1 would need to be within the Kenmore section of Reach 1.
It could be,
No? No.
Anywhere
Yeah.
within the 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, anywhere in 1, 2, 3. So,
Okay.
the
But
whole,
we're not going to
all
go further than obviously the mouth or,
yeah, so we're not going to let them do anything in Lake Washington, and we're not going to let them do anything upstream of 145th Street.
okay, gotcha.
Okay, so procedurally, I was keeping track really good until we got to this page. So what I'm going to propose is that before we take a vote on this, you can actually type this up and put it on the board for us, so that when you take the vote, we'll have the exact, you don't have to do it now, when we're done.
I'm going to get started.
Okay. So that we have a clear record, otherwise I've lost it.
good, thank you, Pat, for admitting.
So David, what are you proposing as I'm not proposing you make the changes right now, I was proposing maybe when we take a break that you could type it up and then we can actually see the language and.
Or write it
Yeah.
so that we can see it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to do, and I can do it while you kind of, while Amy directs you through any further changes, I think.
All right, so you want us to keep going while you,
Yeah.
okay,
He's better at that than I am.
Yeah.
okay, so
I
we're
have one thing
multitasking
on
now.
page 13, so.
Okay, are we done with page 12 then? We think.
Tabling. Yeah.
We'll come back to it when we
We're
get the
going to come
language.
back to
Okay.
that.
So let's go to page 13.
Okay, 13, section 6 references on the 1, 2, third line in the red language says, after the applicant has demonstrated consistency with subsection G5. There is no G5. So I don't, I think it means just 5, but I'm not sure.
Where's that G coming from?
G5 is the new location of mitigation section we just were going through. So it has kind of all,
G5?
that'll be G5.
There,
G is
no,
way
but
up higher at the very beginning of page 9. All the compensatory wetland mitigation code section is in 13.13.020G.
Oh, that whole thing, okay.
That's
Oh,
all
I
part of
did not
G.
see, okay, I see. So all of location is G5?
G5,
Okay,
yep.
thank you. I couldn't see, I didn't go back enough to see the G, okay. Okay. That's it.
And most of the changes in these two sections reflect Sarah's input on kind of the active voice. Also recognizing that the Wyra Salmon Recovery Plan, the Wyra Salmon Plan, and then the city's restoration plan, sort of cleaning up the as amended or supplemented, so getting that language in there, as well as, what's the other, there's one other kind of nuance in there. Maybe that's it. I think that's it. Yeah, so those were the main changes, were those two things.
Anything else on 13? 14? Okay, so I think that takes us through the section you were calling section 4, right, Dave? So we have, I think, reviewed the other parts of this and resolved all the issues. I guess we'll just open it up if board members have any other areas that we need to go back to.
Yeah, I've got something. Last time we talked about no net loss and taking into account things like carbon sequestration and not having, like a 30 or 50-year time lag before there's no net loss, and shading, stormwater management, and a lot of the benefits that riparian vegetation provide. So instead of having the current system where, they plant something and then when those plants grow up, they would compensate for what's lost, require something that's more immediate, which in practice would probably mean more extensive mitigation than what's done now. But instead of having the no net loss being evaluated down the road, have no net loss evaluated immediately or within a year or something like that.
But no net loss does apply to each permit that is granted. So every permit it isn't an aggregate of no net loss. It is each permit has to show no net loss. Now that still does not answer your concern, but I think that is an important concept to understand, that that is what the guidelines say.
Right.
But
and,
that still doesn't take care of this
Yeah, I understand
lag.
that, each permit has to deal with, one issue at a time. But, my concern is really that, we have species that may not last 30 years. So if we allow temporary net loss, we're allowing permanent loss of species. And I think that we need to, sort of step up the game on net loss to say it's no net loss right away, as opposed to making it right decades later.
Where can we add that, David?
I don't know. Amy?
I feel, my
The
understanding,
definition section, maybe?
Yeah, and I think it's a lofty goal, but I'm not sure that it's achievable. I mean, any project that has a permanent wetland impact, it takes time for mitigation to provide those functions. That's sort of built into the Department of Ecology's mitigation ratios to address temporal loss. It's integrated into the rating of the wetland itself in terms of what impacts you're mitigating, and then that factors into the required ratios, whether it's 3-to-1 or 12-to-1. So there's a number of ways that Department of Ecology has tried to address this and at least minimize those temporal losses of functions. The Shoreline Master Program in its entirety is required to meet no net loss of ecological functions, but there is some recognition that there will be losses either from individual projects and or just temporal types of losses, and that's one reason, if you look at those diagrams Ecology's produced, that the restoration plan implementation is so important, because that'll make up for the gaps that happen with permit projects that need to be permitted and are permitted and otherwise follow all of these codes. But again, you still end up with some loss just through temporal issues and how long it takes to restore forest and those types of things. So it is a little bit more about the program no net loss, and as much as it's feasible to minimize impacts and loss at a project scale as well. But there is some sort of balancing in there so that we can't require, 40-to-1 mitigation would still, of a ratio, you'd still have loss in the short term, because it's going to take time, whether you have 100 plants or, 5,000 plants, for them to grow and achieve the same functions that were lost if it was a tree that was cut down. So, yeah, I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm disagreeing with ecology that, the kinds of things they're doing result in no net loss. Because I think that because they take so long to compensate, that, there is effectively net loss. And, we would see, definable net loss if we lost a species because, we're exceeding the TMDL for water temperature and, our salmon can't migrate through Bothell because for the next 20 years, the river's going to be too warm and, salmon only have a lifespan up to 7 years. So if you go, 7 years in a row that the water's too warm, then you have permanent loss. And no matter how well those trees grow in, it's not going to compensate.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of other factors besides wetland fill and wetland impacts that are what this code section's talking about that probably are creating more of the problem. Stormwater inputs and, other issues that have nothing to do with wetland regulations specifically. But as far as Department of Ecology, right now it's the recognized source of best available science, and it's what we're required to use and rely on. I think if there's specific changes we want to make that you suggest, then we could look at those specifically. But I'm struggling to think of a more global fix for what you're talking about that we could incorporate into these wetland regulations.
Yeah, well, again, I think ecology is no longer the best available science. That, there are new studies on, effects of temperature, carbon sequestration, and so on that would say that, the level of compensation they've provided previously is not adequate to prevent net loss. So the regulations are not consistent with the law, and we have a chance to try to come out closer than ecology did to what the right answer would be.
Yes, I would say, I think we're getting well beyond, I think we bit off a big chunk with the mitigation changes we've made, and we have about less than an hour and a half before we're hoping to make a recommendation to council. And I don't see us, especially without a specific proposal, tackling this. That's my take. I feel like that would be, I would need to see a lot of the research and proposed changes, and it would be a significant reworking, and ideally it would be beyond just the shorelines, but something that the city would undertake if it was something that the city council desired.
I would tend to agree, and that's something that certainly could have been added to the items outside the scope for city council to consider, and still could be part of the discussion about reduced buffer widths that did get on the list to be considered in 2020. But without a, particularly with absent a specific proposal for changing the code, I'm not sure how we could deal with that within this scope.
Okay, could we put in the definitions that, when considering no net loss, the city shall consider factors such as carbon sequestration, stormwater uptake, thermal impact, and kind of make a list of the things that will take a long time for vegetation to accomplish, so that we're kind of recognizing that there are these things, and maybe just flag it as something to be considered, and the city would have flexibility about what to do after that consideration, but at least, start the process of thinking about how do we deal with this time delay issue.
So I apologize, it's small, and I'm not sure how I can increase it here, but the current definition, we do have a definition for no net loss of ecological function. Means a public policy goal and requirement to maintain the aggregate total of the city's shoreline ecological functions at its current level. For purposes of reviewing and approving this SMP, current is equivalent to the date of the final shoreline analysis report, February 2011. As a development and/or mitigation standard, no net loss requires that the impacts of a particular shoreline development and/or use, whether permitted or exempt, be identified and prevented or mitigated, such that it has no resulting adverse impacts on shoreline ecological functions or processes relative to the legal condition just prior to the proposed development and/or use.
And that's in our definition section?
That is. Yeah. And so in the normal course of events, since that's based on the shoreline analysis report done with the last major update, the next, that would be updated with the next shoreline analysis report done with the next major update. Correct me if I'm wrong here, to Amy. And certainly the definition would be considered then. But as I said, I think that discussion could be part of the buffer reduction reconsideration if council does move forward with that.
I have an additional question. Did you want to say something else, Dave, on that line?
Yeah, well, I guess kind of the definition of maintain would also be relevant, because if we're saying we're not going to maintain shoreline function for the next 30 years, but after that, when these plants have grown in, we'll be back to our current level. Is that really maintaining? In which case we may want to clarify what maintain means, as well as the factors that should be considered in ecological function.
Can you help me understand, I'm trying to picture what scenario, where I'm going in my head is probably not right, but say there's a bank of really big old trees shading and the city permits them to cut it down and replant it with a bunch of small ones. Is that something that would come up?
Yeah, I think it would. That, if somebody had wooded property along the river or North Creek, they could say, I want to cut down these trees so I can add an extra bedroom to my house. That extra bedroom's in shoreline jurisdiction, so I need to mitigate it. And ecology says I need to plant 3 little trees for each big tree I took down. And the result might be a 4 degrees C increase in water temperature.
Well, I think you'd still have to be outside of, 50 feet or?
Yeah, depending on where you were, but it could be
You'd still have
50
to
to
be a ways away.
150-foot buffer.
That gets into the buffer.
And then the buffer, before you can take advantage of those reduction tools, it has to be degraded. I think at least on the Sammamish River, what we're more likely to see is like the Gun Club is an example, where they removed a whole bunch of blackberry, preserved the trees, and then they did a very robust planting of additional trees. I think that site is one example where you're going to end up with a net gain in a fairly short time frame compared to the existing condition. I think North Creek, Swamp Creek have got a lot more forested areas that are, but again, I think the buffers there, and I'm trying to remember if some of the tools are not available in different designations along those reaches as well. So there's a number of obstacles to clearing trees that would affect temperature, at least via shading and some of those processes. I can't speak to more groundwater driven processes, but yeah.
From my sense, I'm comfortable with the language as is.
With the no net loss language, you mean?
Yes.
I just want to add one thing while we're talking about it. It isn't just the trees and the shading, but the wetlands themselves with the climate change are going to dry up. So all this work we've been talking about regarding the compensatory language and so forth, regardless of what we do in terms of no net loss, there will be a drying up of the wetlands, and there will also be a loss of wildlife. I mean, amphibians are not going to be able to survive because we're going to be the ephemeral wetlands will be gone. So it goes beyond just planting trees, but what we do to keep even the wetlands sizes and composition that we have now will be extremely difficult. So
We're sort of talking about this like there might be a lot of wetland fill proposals in the city of Bothell, and I suspect that they're very few and far between. And just from my own experience permitting projects, it's getting harder and harder and harder, even for projects that have a net benefit in the long run to fill wetlands, just through the Department of Ecology and through Corps of Engineers regulations. So there are an awful lot of barriers in addition to the city's regulations that are making it more difficult to fill wetlands in the first place.
So I have an additional question related to the issue of the buffers on the stream. When I was reviewing the Planning Commission packet, they are not, as I understand it, not going to be looking at the critical area ordinance buffers right now, but that will be put off into 2020 also? Is that correct?
Yeah, so
And I assume that applies to their replacement ratios and such also. Is that true?
yes, all we're proposing now and all we really have the resources for now are to make the adjustments required on the habitat scores and applying those to our existing buffers and other provisions for buffers. But we have identified, and ecology has identified a need to do a more comprehensive update of our buffers and based on best available science now.
Okay, so then my question is, if a planning commission is looking at buffers and replacement ratios, will the shoreline board work with them? Because this affects the buffers not only of the stream, but of the wetlands that would be in shoreline jurisdiction.
Well, since the shoreline code has its own critical areas section that apply to critical areas within the shoreline jurisdiction, what the Planning Commission does would only affect critical areas outside of the shoreline jurisdiction.
But there's nothing right now for the shoreline board in 2020 to look at buffers for wetlands, for example, and other critical areas that might be in shorelines.
That's correct.
So what are you going to, are they required to be updated also?
We haven't received that comment to that effect from ecology on the.
Well, if you're updating the critical areas, the shoreline jurisdiction is a critical area. It's one of the critical areas, it's fish and habitat.
Right.
As a critical area.
But the shoreline management code has its own regulations for critical.
But right now, many of those for the wetlands and such are the same as they are for outside of wetlands. I'm just saying that to my knowledge, except for the specific issue on the buffers from the stream, we are not looking at differences in buffers for wetlands or replacement areas. And it would appear to me that since those are critical areas, we would need to look at that also.
Well, I believe that the next time to look at that, and this could change with, if we get input from ecology, would be during the next update of the critical areas.
In 7 years?
Or when, or if council chose to initiate that prior to that update. But it's
Interesting.
certainly not
It's-
within the charge that council gave Shoreline Board.
I mean,
with this
it's
update.
true that shorelines have their own code, but many of them are the same in terms of wetlands as they are outside. Outside shoreline jurisdiction.
Yeah, all I'm saying is that what the
I know.
what the Planning Commission is working on will not apply, and what they may be doing next year will not apply to the shoreline jurisdiction.
So I guess one thing that although we will not be meeting again, we should be also asking council to look at other critical area buffers other than just on the shoreline jurisdiction. That's critical area buffers for wetlands.
If that's the
I'm just saying we might consider that.
yeah.
Okay.
But we did go through the process of identifying those items outside the scope of this.
No, I
update.
understand that, yeah.
So certainly individually you can make those, but if for the Shoreline Board to make that recommendation, it would have to be
I
discussed
understand.
and agreed to by the board.
Okay. Okay. Could we
Okay.
take a quick break before we start this final discussion?
Okay,
Thank
sounds
you.
good to me. Let's take what do you need, 5 minutes, 10 minutes?
Fine.
5 minutes? Okay, we'll begin at 7:55, let's say. The Bothell Shoreline Board is on break until 7:55. I'd like to reconvene the Bothell Shoreline Board's meeting for April 8th. So the staff has prepared for us the new language in section 4. Staff asked if we have enough clarification on the other items. The other items were fairly small. I've taken notes on them. My plan is to go back through them after the motion is made, just so that make sure that we have them all down in agreement with them, and then review the one that the staff has prepared, or we could even do that one first since it's the big one. So why don't we do that? Let's look at what Dave's prepared and make sure we're all good with that.
Could we have a few minutes to look at it?
Sure,
carefully
yeah,
and-
yeah.
And consider it? Sure.
Did you want to take a few minutes right now?
So
before I-
we've got it on our,
Yeah.
okay, we'll go ahead and take a look. Okay, is everybody had a chance to take a look? That captured our discussion? They may have any corrections?
Can we add the same equal or greater ecological benefits language that's used elsewhere? I guess that would go in number 4. So I'm just, instead of saying we'll provide ecological benefits, we'll provide equal or greater ecological benefits.
Yes. That's right. Equal or greater.
Go ahead, your microphone, please.
Yes, I think that should be in there.
What if the project was equal or greater outside of the city of Bothell, and it had clear benefits within the city of Bothell, but you had to demonstrate they were equal within Bothell?
And I think the spirit of our discussion has been that it should be within the city of Bothell. So, even if you did something in Redmond that, was great for the river and, helped Bothell a little bit, that we'd really want the benefits within the city to be big enough. So, if they did something in Redmond that was really, really great, so by the time it came down to Bothell, it was still greater than the negative impact of whatever the project within the city was, that would work. But, I think, our discussion the last few meetings has been that we want to try to require, actions in Bothell to be mitigated in Bothell, and that, we'd count on other jurisdictions to do things there. And, I think we've made a reasonable compromise by saying we'll go up and down the Sammamish rivers from the mouth to 145th. But, so if you wanted to phrase it so that it was, within, those first 3 reaches of the Sammamish River, I'd be fine with that. But I think, like there's the Willowmore project that's should do wonderful things for the Sammamish River, but whether by the time that gets down to Bothell, it'll still be wonderful, remains to be seen, I think.
I think we also have to recognize if it's a mitigation project that's going on outside of the city, that essentially means that it's not going to go on in the city. So I think that we have a right to ask for that, because you have lost the opportunity to do it within the city.
Yeah, some of my challenges is thinking how to demonstrate that, if, for the project,
That's, I think we have to have a very high standard if we're going outside of the city. That was my concern with this preference in the first place.
I am a little bit cautious about adding the extra language because it poses more questions. My opinion, the first question is equal or greater than what?
Ecological benefits.
But equal or greater than the harm caused by the project?
Yeah, typically it would be to what the function was that was impacted. So if that was if that wetland had
Right.
habitat and cooling, then you would be looking for habitat and cooling typically.
You could you add then the function that has been lost?
Perhaps. My concern is just that the
What's that?
language is getting very clunky, and perhaps a consultant can go through it, but I feel like we need to be pretty clear here because this hierarchy is already pretty complex. So at this point, I feel like if we can take out language to really hit home our main points, it might become stronger. And the restrictions will have more power if they're more clear.
Yeah, well, I think I would be happier to specify equal or greater ecological benefits to the project being mitigated as opposed to leaving out equal or greater, because then you're changing the intent to just has to be a little bit better, meaning there would be net loss, so.
Yeah, and I'm with you on that. Like, as written without that, it could just be any smidge of benefit. But I'm just thinking the practicality of trying to implement it. What's the best?
I think, would you say that again, Dave? Would you say that again, David?
Well, demonstrate that the mitigation project will provide equal or greater ecological benefits than the negative consequences of the project, or something to that effect. So that way we're answering the question, equal or greater than what? But we're still requiring the equal or greater than.
I think we begin at 4 with compensatory mitigation shall address the functions affected by the proposed project.
Okay.
Yeah, so, yeah, if we can just sort of use that language by reference from earlier on, I think it would be more concise anyway, and hopefully it would be equally clear if, we're talking about mitigation for a specific thing, and, we've got this concept that the mitigation should provide equal or greater benefits than the negative consequences of whatever the core project is. And, that's the concept we're applying throughout this hierarchy.
5A has that a little bit already too. I don't know if that's language you want to steal or maybe that's sufficient, but 5A, which is in front of this section, says compensatory mitigation actions shall be conducted on the site of the alteration except when the applicant can demonstrate that off-site mitigation is ecologically preferable and will provide equivalent or greater replacement of critical area functions and values when compared to on-site mitigation.
I think that
So
with
that
that
might
showing up
be-
at the top of 4 and at the top of 5, I'm comfortable with equal or greater as you proposed it here.
Yeah, so, yeah, I think, just equal or greater is probably fine, because we're specifying that the equal or greater has to be measured within the city of Bothell, not for the mitigation project in its entirety.
Yeah.
I'm wondering again if we might want to just cut out the last part of the sentence and refer back to 5A, just as a rough idea. In adjacent jurisdictions within the same sub-drainage basin or on Sammamish River reaches 1, 2, and 3, period, because we are already saying in 5A that it needs to be equal or greater. Perhaps we could refer back to 5A.
Yeah, I think that could work. So if we specify in 5A that, everything is, within the city of Bothell, its municipal urban growth area, or, the sub-drainage basins, that extend outside the jurisdiction, and the parts of the river that extend outside the jurisdiction, and that's where we measure things, then we don't have to restate that all through the hierarchy.
Something like that, if we can kind of agree what we mean up front and then not restate it later, because then it will lose its power if it's a shorthand.
Yep.
If that makes sense to everybody and if it seems more simple to the reader.
I don't think it would hurt to either specifically refer back to that, but I personally don't feel that it loses anything by repeating it. I think it makes it stronger, because here you're actually talking about off-site. I mean, in adjacent jurisdictions. I just think it emphasizes that even when it's on an adjacent jurisdiction, this has to be done.
I feel on this, I don't have the experience of trying to go through this process, so I might refer that to people who do have the experience with people trying to sneak in through the law, or to the consultants who have experience as people trying to apply the law to a project.
I don't think it's confusing to implement it with the full text in 4.
No.
So leaving in this, what I've shown as strikeout here,
Yes.
and then taking out this only when,
Yes.
Great.
and you're, and okay with equal or greater. Like that?
Okay, seems like we have reached a consensus.
Okay. I'm going to hit save.
Okay, so I think procedural wise, Dave, we need to close the public hearing and then do our final deliberation and then,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
So I will give one more opportunity to the public who has dwindled, if they would like to have an opportunity to weigh in at this time. If not, a motion to close the public hearing would be in order.
I motion to close the public hearing.
Is there a second?
Second?
Motion by Board Member Page, second by Board Member Bain to close the open public hearing. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No opposed. Passes unanimously with Board Member Orr absent. Okay, so is there any further changes? I think we've kind of captured everything. Dave, are we ready to take a final action then?
Yeah, that was, I thought that once we reached a consensus on this section, we could then adopt the, as a recommendation, the code as amendment, the proposed code as amended.
Okay.
Dave, I believe you had one question early on seeking clarification that we didn't intend to require variances or the non-conditional use. And I don't think we've discussed that tonight.
Are you referring to the flow chart?
Or
Was it
the
your-
requirement to get a shoreline conditional use permit for off-site mitigation.
Right, I can't remember if that was in the
Oh.
packet or your presentation, but I believe you had that question.
I'm sorry, yes. So I did want to, we were a little bit unclear about whether that was the will of the board, or, but the direction seemed to be to go with the conditional use permit process for any of these. Is that,
That's what I recall.
okay? Okay, that's good enough for me. That's how we've written it up, so.
Okay, sounds like we're ready for a motion to adopt,
Actually,
approve,
approve
approve.
the
That's right,
recommendation.
we're not making an adoption, we're making a recommendation to council. So do you have a recommended motion for us to help us, or we'll just work our way through it?
I think, I guess I would suggest a motion to approve the proposed shoreline master program amendments as amended this evening.
Okay,
So that would let us adopt all the amendments at once and not have to go back through them one by one.
well, so for the
Cool, what about
record, I think we do want to go back through, and I'll be happy to do that before we take the vote. If anybody disagrees with how I've captured it, feel free to weigh in and correct me. So, a motion to approve the 2019
I say, do we want to go through it first and then some
Maybe.
move? Or,
Yeah, maybe that'd be less clumsy, yeah.
yeah, and then we can,
Okay, so let's go back through them one by one, make sure, or maybe have Dave go back through them to make sure he's captured them correctly.
yeah, I
So-
think I've got a good list as well.
So the first issue I have was to add a definition of a reach in Bothell. So in the definition section, we would add reach in Bothell, colon, 1 Sammamish River mouth in Kenmore to 96th Avenue Northeast Bridge, 2 96th Avenue Northeast Bridge to the North Creek confluence, and 3 North Creek confluence to Northeast 145th Street Bridge in Woodinville. Okay. The second item was on page 11, paragraph 5C. The city may allow off-site mitigation only when an applicant can. So that's the change. We're changing the will to a may and adding or moving the only. Okay.
Correct.
Number 3 was in 5C number 1. We're changing the word should to shall in the third sentence, or third line, I should say. Should becomes a shall. And then in the next to last line, we're adding, after proposed flood storage capacity, we're adding the words, the position in the land, or just position in the landscape. And then on the bottom of the page 11, we're going to strike the last 3, we're going to put a period after the word city and then strike the rest of the last 3 lines and strike the rest of that stuff on the next page 12, right? Everybody's okay with that?
Yep.
Okay. Then on page 12, we have the code or the proposed language in front of us. I think just somebody should read it onto the record since, Dave, why don't you do the honors?
Let me increase the font size. Okay. So this would be 5D, subsection 5D. Offsite mitigation, when approved by the city, shall be required in the following order of preference, as illustrated in figure 13.13.020.G.5.D below. 1. On an adjacent property in Bothell within the same subdrainage basin on North Creek or Swamp Creek, or on the Sammamish River. 2. In the same subarea basin in Bothell as the impacted wetland when the wetland is located in shoreline jurisdiction associated with North Creek or Swamp Creek, or on the Sammamish River in Bothell when the impacted wetland is located in shoreline jurisdiction associated with the Sammamish River. 3. When the shoreline jurisdiction of the city of, within the shoreline jurisdiction of the city of Bothell or its municipal urban growth area. And 4, in adjacent jurisdictions when the same sub-drainage basin within the same sub-drainage basin on North Creek or Swamp Creek, or on Sammamish River reaches 1, 2, or 3, only when the applicant can demonstrate that the mitigation project will provide equal or greater ecological benefits to the shoreline jurisdiction of the city of Bothell or its municipal urban growth area.
Okay. See any objections? The next change was the diagram that we would just visually flop the concentric circles over and the text would be right side up and the circles would just be most important at the top rather than the bottom. Did I lose a sticky? That's my last sticky. Did I miss? I have a sticky laying here. Did I capture everything?
You covered my list.
Okay, I took 7. I took my other sticky off because it was David's changes. I gave up.
Pat, there is one more a definition that was added that we should add in here. There was a definition added for in lieu fees. It's actually on page 4. It's a new definition. It's on page 4 of our agenda packet.
Yes.
So if it's within the document in front of us, we are adopting everything else in here verbatim
So
unless
that's
we
okay.
change it, yes.
We just hadn't specifically mentioned it, so I
Correct.
thought we should mention it.
Yes. Yeah,
And I think he had a couple other corrections in the PowerPoint he did at the start, like that little,
those were note boxes, right?
well, there was the figure of the stream that runs alongside North Creek Sports Field.
Right, but that's
next-
in our packet, so
Yeah.
we don't have to, I asked him
Unless someone had discussion on
specifically.
those.
So why don't we go to that page? What page was that on? It should be in our packet, though, as he showed it on the board, it should be in our packet that way. I
Okay.
haven't checked.
That's page 15 of attachment 3. Well, actually, the first one was on page 9 of attachment 3.
Right, so it's already it's in the packet,
Okay.
so.
Okay, so that one got fixed before you did the PowerPoint, and the concentric circle one's the only one that's been
Yeah.
updated since the packet.
Yeah.
Okay. And did you have any other corrections in that PowerPoint that are not in the packet?
Not to the actual code, just to the note box, and we've
Okay.
incorporated that one, the definition, the reach definition into the code. I think we're good.
Okay, so now we're ready for a motion to
Approve.
Approve.
All right, I'll give it the first shot. I move we approve the proposed master plan, or shoreline master program update amendment as amended this evening and read into the record by Dave Boyd, the changes that this group has come up with.
And by myself.
Yes.
I second.
There's been a motion by Board Member Cox, second by Board Member Page, to approve the Shoreline Master Program recommendation to council as amended. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously with Board Member Orr absent. Okay, so that brings us back to our agenda, which we have a study session. There is none. Old business, there is none. Reports from staff.
Well, I just did want to, again, say that we would like, as a kind of a last order of business, to either appoint the chair or 1 to 3 representatives to be there for the city council study session and public hearing, and then we'll be making these revisions and circulating them with the minutes for your final review.
Okay,
I will be able to attend the planning, the planning session of council, but
the
not.
study
The
session.
study session, excuse me, but not the hearing, so if that would help.
Okay, let's see if we have other volunteers. Would anybody else like to attend the council meetings?
Can you, Dave, remind me of the dates?
Study session on May 14th and public hearing on June 4th.
Would these be at 6 p.m. as well?
The
Yes.
council meetings start at 6.
Okay.
But
When
they have other
this item
things
would
on
be
first.
on. We'll have a better idea when we get closer, but it's always can be variable. Yeah.
It's up to them. Well, usually the study session is first.
Usually, I think I can do the June 4th, but not the May 14th.
I can do either or both.
And I think I could do both.
Okay, so we have could-dos, so is that a confirmed volunteerism?
That is a volunteer for me.
Okay, and David as well? Okay. So for both of them? Okay, so it sounds like then I won't attend, so we won't have a quorum issue.
You're off the hook.
Well, I've been working a lot of second shifts, so that works okay for me to not have to work around my work schedule. Okay, sounds good. If that changes, just let David know, and then David can let me know that, there's a spot opened up, and I'll try to make it if I can.
Okay, great.
Report from members. So I'd like to just take this opportunity to say thank you for the board, for your hard work and diligence, and to our staff for their hard work and diligence and putting up with us, a board that doesn't meet frequently, so we had our own learning curve that we went through. So thank you for your patience. And
Thank you for doing a good job and your patience with us. But I also want to say I listened to our last meeting again on the YouTube, and I really was impressed by the quality and depth of the conversation. I thought it was really quite remarkable, and I think I'll feel the same way if I listen tonight. So thank you all.
Thank you.
And I'd like to echo our appreciation to all of you for the effort you've put in here. Thank you.
any other comments in closing? This is, where, as David mentioned, we won't plan on meeting again unless the council asks us to take up another item for them. So with that, I think I've got a gavel here that I haven't used yet. I'm just dying to use it, but I think
It's not 2023 yet, Pat.
so. I think we still need a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
There's been a motion by Board Member Cox, second by Board Member Bain to adjourn. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned.
Oh, that was good.